The Miami Dolphins restructured the contract of Bradley Chubb this morning, creating some much-needed cap space. But in the midst of all of the moves that are happening, where do the Dolphins stand? That's here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find their shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets. Lowest prices, guaranteed. Guaranteed to make your head spin is the news cycle as it is happening in real time right now for the Miami Dolphins and all 32 teams across the league. Because there's transactions that are announced, but they're not formalized. There's contracts that are signed, but we don't have the details on. There's salary cap compliance for all 32 teams that you need to be mindful of. There's restructures and trades and all of the above is happening. And oh, by the way, in the background, the NFL draft process is well underway with the pro day circuit and the combine having come and gone earlier this month. So I had a couple people at the end of last week ask me, Kyle, what's the deal with the Dolphins salary cap? Where are we at? I said, ask me again next Tuesday because it is just impossible to keep tabs on everything that is going on. And still right now, quite frankly, it is impossible because the Dolphins this morning, it was announced, I believe Field Yates was the first to report this from ESPN, that the Dolphins had restructured the contract of linebacker / edge rusher Bradley Chubb, creating an additional $11 million in cap space for the Miami Dolphins. And the alarm bells go off and everybody reads between the lines, $11 million in cap space. Here comes a big move. We know all the players that have signed, but pump brakes a little bit, at least as far as I'm concerned, because you can look at the two most valuable resources on the internet this time of year are overthecap.com and SpotRack. They're the two salary cap contract resources for sports nuts who get into that kind of stuff. And we geek out about all this kind of stuff on the show all the time. And SpotRack has the Dolphins at $13.6 million in cap space, and Over the Cap has the Dolphins at $13.8 million in cap space. So you may say, well, they just had a flurry of signings yesterday. They signed Jack Driscoll to the offensive line in addition to Isaiah Wynn. We'll talk more about him later this week. But I wanted to do the salary cap show first. We know they signed Jordan Poyer. We know they signed Aaron Brewer. We know they signed Jordan Brooks. They've got these guys in-house. They've agreed to terms reportedly with Braxton Berrios to bring him back. A lot of these moves are being made. But these online resources like SpotRack and Over the Cap, they're missing the contract details on several prominent players. Use SpotRack as just the example. And this is no shot at either one of these resources. That's just all the transactioning is happening in real time and the time it takes to get the details of the contracts. It's impossible to expect it to be updated in real time. It usually takes about a week for the dust to settle. So these resources have Miami at $13.5 million in cap space, but none of them have the details of the Shaq Barrett contract and what that salary cap looks like, or Braxton Berrios. We've heard it reported up to $3 million. We don't know what the actual terms of that deal are. We've heard Aaron Brewer's reported as 3 years, $21 million, but we don't know the distribution of cap. We don't know if they put void years on the back end of that. We don't know what the cap hit looks like there. We got no clue about the financial terms of Jack Driscoll or Isaiah Wynn or Benito Jones or Deshaun Hand or Jody Fortson or Jonathan Harris. We know Jordan Poyer's been reported at 1 year, $2 million. There's not a lot of funny money you can do with that, but nevertheless, it's still not logged against the salary cap space that the Dolphins have. So I say all that to say, yes, the Dolphins opened up some cap space. And it's been reported, I know Barry Jackson, the Miami Herald, excellent insider, been at this a really long time, has reported the Dolphins are continuing to poke around and look at players and not just vet minimum players at a couple different spots. He alluded to specifically the wide receiver 3 position, whether that's via trade or whether that's via free agency that'll make a move. But the Bradley Chubb deal doesn't guarantee that's going to happen, because what happened with Bradley Chubb is they restructured his base salary of about we'll call it about $13.5 million. It's a little bit more than that, but we'll use round numbers here on the show because I'm not a math guy. They created about $11 million in cap space by creating a lump sum signing bonus and prorating it out across the 4 years remaining on his contract this year and 3 following seasons, 2025, 2026, and 2027. So they get $11 million in cap space by restructuring Bradley Chubb. I know one of the first questions Dolphins fans may have is, well, Kyle, you talk often about how the Dolphins strategize exit ramps on contracts. What does this do for that? And what this does for that, for Bradley Chubb, is it still leaves you with an exit strategy for post-June 1st, 2025. I did that in the offseason blueprint. I said, look, if you need cap space next year, you want to transition away from Bradley Chubb, you can do that post-June 1st, just like you did with Xavier Howard this year. You can do with Bradley Chubb next offseason, and that's even after you restructure his contract. That rings true. After the restructure, and I'm not talking about exit strategies from Bradley Chubb, because I don't think Bradley Chubb can't be a very valuable asset for what the Dolphins are going to continue to do. But you got to know all the ramifications of the deals as they happen, and know and understand these exit ramps to gain a full appreciation of when are the Dolphins going to extend Jalen Phillips, and what does that look like? And do they end up drafting a defensive end early in the draft? So Bradley Chubb, after the restructure, you could post-June 1st release Bradley Chubb for a $9 million dead cap hit in 2025, which would save you over $20 million. And then you would carry an $18 million dead cap hit in 2026, which is the remainder of the voided money from dollars that have already been paid out to him, but just spaced out over a greater period of time. But even that $18 million dead cap hit is about $12 million less in 2026 than what you're currently on the books for. So you've restructured and created space, and now you can move on from Bradley Chubb in 2025, post-June 1st, and save $20 million in cap space and an additional $10 million in cap space against what you're currently on the books for after restructuring his contract. Okay, so I know it's one of the first questions I got asked on social media is, what does this mean for dead money? Okay, we understand all the components of the contract. It's important to understand all the ramifications, all the levers that they can pull, why the Dolphins structure the contracts the way they do, how it's important, and how it gives them the flexibility to pivot and readjust. And they will have the chance to do that after this upcoming season with Bradley Chubb. But we are obviously hoping that he remains healthy and will be back at full strength and can play to the standard that he set for himself as a Miami Dolphin last season. And if that's the case, we're probably not talking about moving on for Bradley Chubb, because he will have earned the next year of that contract at competitive pay for top-end edge performance, which is what he gave the Dolphins last year. So I just don't want to make this, we're good, guys. We can get out of Bradley Chubb's contract. But it does bear understanding. And it's not like they maximum restructured it either, which I think is interesting. He still was left with not the vet minimum amount of salary. They left meat on the bone. They didn't do as much as they possibly could. Is that because they only wanted to create the space for compliance in here and now? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Or otherwise, is it we wanted to maintain the optimum amount of flexibility to transition away from this contract if we felt like we needed to? I don't know. It'll be hard to get in their head and know that either. We have some outstanding details for other player contracts. I have my version of that, my table of that, my own resource of that is coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you stick with us. There's no reason to get stressed out on game day if you're trying to get down to the Panthers game or the Heat game or the Marlins, and baseball will be back before you know it. Gametime has you covered. You can get last-minute tickets with lowest prices, guaranteed, and Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, because you can see the view from your seat before you buy. Their all-in prices show you The upfront dollar amount, there's no surprises when you put the tickets in your cart and go to checkout, and you can buy tickets with just a few taps from your phone. Gametime is obsessed with finding you ways to save money on tickets. They have deals right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today on last-minute tickets. Lowest prices guaranteed. So if you're watching on YouTube, great. I have a visual aid for you. If you're not watching on YouTube, no worries. We're going to talk through everything all the same. But one of the things that I do every offseason is I have a 5-year rolling table of salary cap commitments for the Miami Dolphins. And what I've done is I've put some placeholders in based on the reported dollar amounts for some of the Dolphins contracts that we don't know the details on. We're going to pull that up here on the show and kind of overview where the Dolphins could stand, knowing that there's some wiggle room up or down. So here's what my resource has. I have the Dolphins as of right now, after the Bradley Chubb contract, when filling in for the Braxton Berrios contract, the Jody Fortson contract, the Aaron Brewer and Isaiah Wynn and Jack Driscoll contracts, the Benito Jones and Jonathan Harris and Deshaun Hand contracts, and the Shaq Barrett contract. I have the Dolphins at about $1.3, $1.5 million in cap space. And again, this is not a definitive number. I've put placeholders in. In reality, I would guess it could potentially be $1 or $2 million higher. I would be very surprised if it was lower than this amount. I tried to be as reasonably aggressive with the forecasted dollar amounts. And some of these guys like Jody Fortson and Benito Jones and Jonathan Harris and Deshaun Hand, I would expect those guys to be vet minimum guys or slightly above vet minimum guys, which only means you're going to have a few hundred K difference or so from what your not top 51 player contracts are. Most of those are around $900,000 per season right now that are not making the cut for Miami. So those contracts are the difference of a couple $100,000. The Braxton Berrios contract being up to $3 million is a bit of a wild card. The Aaron Brewer contract in general is a big mystery. They've put void years on the back end in most of the contracts that they've done. Did they do that with this contract? If they did, I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't dissimilar to what happened with the Kendall Fuller contract, which we got the details on. Kendall Fuller's on the books this year for $2.5 million in cap space on a 2-year, $16 million contract. I mean, that's perfectly digestible and a great value contract for Miami. I would expect Aaron Brewer on 3 years, 21 is what that contract is reported as, is probably the same. The question is for 2025 and 2026, those later years, is there a void year on the back end of that or not? I have Isaiah Wynn in at about the same amount that he signed at last year. I think Jack Driscoll coming in probably put him in the same bucket. I'd be surprised if he was much higher than what Isaiah Wynn's making, because Driscoll is a career backup player. I guess the alternative or the argument for more money budgeted for Jack Driscoll right now is that Dan Feeney came in last year, and Dan Feeney got 3.5 for the Dolphins. So there's perhaps some upward mobility there for that dollar amount. So you're using approximations as best as you can. And I have the Dolphins at about $1.5 million in cap space. So there's not a lot of things that you're going to be able to do right now with splashing or bringing in a big name from a dollar amount, just because when you factor in all of the contracts that we don't know from over the cap and spot rack, it's much tighter. Like the Bradley Chubb move was probably done last night before the end of the day so that the Dolphins closed the day compliant. Would be my guess. I don't think they woke up this morning, got on the phone, and did it first thing. And I made that observation last night or yesterday. Was I'm sitting here looking at all these deals that are agreed to terms but not officially signed. And I said, well, maybe what they'll end up doing is they'll kind of slow drip the signings throughout the course of the week and open stuff up as they go. And then they signed everybody yesterday, it felt like. And you said, okay, they really got to get something done because Barrett signed yesterday. Fuller signed yesterday. You had Isaiah Wynn and Jack Driscoll sign yesterday. I think the only one who hasn't signed, Jody Fortson signed. I think the only one who hasn't signed is Braxton Berrios. So from Miami's perspective, the Bradley Chubb extension is an exciting development to hear that the Dolphins are intent on continuing to be aggressive to find the right priced talents to add into the mix without compromising the exit strategy of the contract of Bradley Chubb. But I don't think it gives you the space you need to make a move without doing something else to go with it. I think Bradley Chubb was as much about getting salary cap compliant as it was anything else. That's not to say they're not done. And that's what we're going to look at next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. We're going to look at what moves the Dolphins can still make, what strings they can still pull to create additional salary cap space so that when they are ready to make that next transaction, they can have the salary cap space that they need to do it. That's up here next on Locked On Dolphins. Did you know that even with a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, there's no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. This claim is as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing includes risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match, and you must keep your Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. So what can the Dolphins do at this stage with, in reality, when you factor all of the contracts with the details that aren't established on the online cap resources, you're looking at probably $1.5 million, $2 million, somewhere in that ballpark in cap space. Not a lot of flashy, sexy moves that you can make for $1.5 million. It is important to remember you lop off the next lowest rated contract against the top 51 when you add a player. That right now is a $915,000 salary, comes off the books. So if you signed a player for $2 million, you'd only have to accommodate the $1,085,000 because the $915,000 was already accounted for from the player who was 51st, who is now outside the cutoff of the top 51. That makes sense. But for Miami, the following moves are moves that they have at their disposal to make. The big one is the Tyreek Hill contract. They have not touched that contract yet. Is that with the intent of negotiating an extension? Is that a byproduct of Tyreek Hill once again being in the headlines for off-the-field storylines? This latest one this week or over the weekend, stemming from a incident in which the police were called to his home and spoke with his wife about some kind of dispute in which Tyreek allegedly, according to him, flicked a cigar in her face. The verbiage from another portion of the report was that he smashed an unlit cigar in her face. And for Tyreek Hill, obviously, with the investment the Dolphins have in him, if you were to push that money around for a player who is in the headlines for all the wrong reasons way too often, if we're being honest, and this goes back beyond even his time in Miami, but just this past year, the past 12 months, the incident at the marina, this and whatever happened with the content creator and the one-on-one and your leg broke and whatever else, like, it's a lot. And if you are the Dolphins, you just need to be cognizant of the pattern of behavior and know that there is an opportunity for you to get burned if Tyreek makes poor judgments off the field. And do you want to have a bunch of money tied into a player, so much so that if you were to restructure his contract, you'd almost have to give him more money on an extension to make it a digestible contract in 2025, specifically 2026, when I think he's currently on the books for like $43 million in salary, right? I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if that's the holdup. I don't know if they'd rather extend Tyreek Hill now, and just based off the information that they have collected around the off the field stuff, it's not a concern for them. I don't know. They're keeping their options open right now is what I can tell you. But that's the big domino for Miami. If they were to restructure that contract with no void years, they'd get another $12.5 million in cap space. That's the big shoe that has yet to fall for them. The other big shoe is the Tua Tagovailoa contract extension, which could open somewhere probably between $10 and $12 million in cap space as well. They get that done. That one's harder to do because it's not a matter of just executing a restructure. It's agreeing to terms on everything on a contract that's probably going to be a couple $100 million. And you understand if that process takes a little bit more time. They've done what they can do with the Teron Armstead contract. They've restructured Jalen Ramsey's contract already. They've restructured Zach Sealer and Durham Smythe got a restructure and Alec Ingold got a restructure, and they reworked Jeff Wilson's contract to save a little over $1 million in cap space. So here's some of the moves that the Dolphins have beyond Tua extension and whatever reworking they would choose is the most preferable option with the Tyreek Hill, whether that's a contract extension or whether that is a restructure or whether they would rather have the fluidity of the contract and not touch it. You have a few players that you can transition away from. David Long's an extension candidate for me. I think you could extend David Long theoretically. He's in the last year of his contract and save a couple $1 million in cap space there. You could theoretically move on from Mike White and save $3.5 million in cap space. I'm not advocating that for any means, but I am identifying it as a potential move that the team could make. The team could potentially trade Liam Eichenberg. This is a player with positional flexibility in the offensive line market drying up the way that it has. You consider Miami bringing back Isaiah Wynn, bringing back Robert Jones, bringing in Jack Driscoll with positional flexibility, signing to a new contract Aaron Brewer to be a starting player on the team. I think you're getting close to, especially if you invest a draft selection on the offensive line, a numbers game where not everybody you brought in and not everybody who's been here is going to be here when you reach the end of the roster. Is that a player somebody would find some value in because of his positional flexibility? If that were the case, you could save about $3.4 million if he were a part of a trade elsewhere. So that's another name to watch. Duke Riley, you could save $2.5 million if you moved on from him. Would they be comfortable? Would the Dolphins be comfortable with Channing Tindall stepping into that special teams role? Since you have Anthony Walker now as the fifth linebacker on the roster, they only carried 4 linebackers last year. These are all just options, right? Jason Sanders, you can move on from and save about $2.5 million in cap space there. Would be very surprised if that was a move that they chose to make, since the entire argument for bringing back Jake Bailey was continuity in your special teams units. But I do think it's important to at least outline all of the options that the Dolphins have in the event that they do decide, whether it's via trade or free agency, a third wide receiver is a move that they are interested in acquiring, or maybe it's another pass rusher, maybe it's a safety. I think they need a third safety. We went over the needs yesterday on the show. You guys know what the needs are. I think there's a few veteran safeties on the free agent market that might be attractive. But I could tell you just based on listening to Barry Jackson and his reporting in the last 24 hours, he's certainly hinting that Miami is exploring, when he says they're exploring all avenues, that reads to me as though he's hinting that they've been exploring some trade options. So if you can get one of these players in a package to go out in return for a player, maybe it makes the space that you need to accommodate whatever player you are trading for and acquiring. So Bradley Chubb in a vacuum doesn't get it done, but Bradley Chubb, with perhaps some of the definitive numbers that we have yet to see, gives you a little bit more wiggle room for where the projection that I have sits right now. And then you send one of these players out that you could save $3.5 million in cap space for, and maybe you have $6 million in cap space. And maybe that is enough to fit whoever you want to bring in from a salary cap perspective, fit one more player of significance onto your roster between now and the draft and June when you open up the Xavier Howard money. That's going to do it for us here today on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion, this update in the Dolphins salary cap standing, where they stand, where Bradley Chubb stands, what other moves this team can make, and a little bit more of a complete picture than what the chaos of real time is affording us to all of our preferred resources as well. So come on back and see me again tomorrow. Fins up. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. Hope to see you soon.